نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. We know that the normal tartib is this here, that in a 4 rakat fard namaz, we're not speaking about the 4 rakat sunnat namaz. In the 4 rakat fard namaz, right? You recite Surah Fatiha in the first 2 rakats, and then you recite a surah after that, right? And then in the third and the fourth rakat, we said it is not farz, or it is not wajib. It is sunnah to recite Surah Fatiha to such an extent that even if a person remains silent for the duration of 3 tasbihat, or if a person recited 3 tasbih, then salat will be done, right? So right, that's how it's supposed to be, right? But now what we got, the scenario is وَمَنْ قَرَى فِي الْعِشَاءِ فِي الْأُولَيَيْنِ السُّورَةَ. What happened, this person in the first 2 rakats, he's supposed to recite he's supposed to recite Surah Fatiha and a surah. But what he done, he forgot, right? And he only recited the what surahs, right? وَلَمْ يَقْرَأْ بِفَاتِحَةِ الْكِتَابِ. So in the first 2 rakats, he's supposed to recite Surah Fatiha, but he never recites Surah Fatiha, right? So لَمْ يُعِيدْ فِي الْأُخْرَيَيْنِ. He will not repeat this in the ukhrayayn, in the last 2 rakats. So this here could apply to anybody. This could apply to it could apply to you reading your sunnat namaz. It could apply to the imam performing the salat. It could apply to a woman reading salat, a first salat alone at home. It could apply to a woman reading a sunnat salat. It could apply to anything, right? So وَمَنْ قَرَأَ فِي الْإِشَاءِ, whoever recited in Isha, right, فِي الْأُولَيَيْنِ, in the first 2 rakat, as-surah faqat, right? وَلَمْ يَقْرَأْ بِفَاتِحَةِ الْكِتَابِ, in order to recite the Fatiha Kitab, لَمْ يُعِدْ فِي الْأُخْرَيَيْنِ. Here he's saying you do not have to repeat what? The Surah Fatiha in the next 2 rakats, right? That's what he's saying. Follow nicely. لَمْ يُعِدْ. In other words, originally it wasn't wajib to recite Surah Fatiha in the second 2 rakat. Originally it wasn't wajib to recite in the second 2 rakat. Here also you don't have to recite again, right? ولم يزد عليها قرأ في الأخرين فاتحة والسورة وجهرة، وهذا عند أبي حنيفة ومحمد رحمه الله. قال أبو يوسف رحمه الله لا يقضي واحدة منهما. Okay, so وإن قرأ الفاتحة ولم يزد عليها, right? So that was the first scenario you done, right? That was the first year. The second scenario is this here. وإن قرأ الفاتحة, a person recited Surah Fatiha in the first 2 rakats, right? وَلَمْ يَزِدْ عَلَيْهَا, but he did not increase upon it. He never recited the surahs. وَلَمْ يَزِدْ عَلَيْهَا. So he's saying, قَرَأَ فِي الْأَخِيرَيْنِ الْفَاتِحَةَ وَالسُّورَةَ. So in the next 2 rakats, you must recite قَرَأَ فِي الْأَخِيرَيْنِ. In the next 2 rakats, you must recite Surah Fatiha and the surah. And وَجَهَرَ, and you will recite loud. You understood that? So you got the opposite scenario now. The first scenario was he only recited the 2 surahs, right? He never recited Surah Fatiha. So we'll say it's not necessary for him to recite Surah Fatiha in the next 2 rakats, right? That was one scenario. The other scenario is he only recited Surah Fatiha in the first 2 rakats. He only recited Surah Fatiha. Somehow you got confused or you forgot or whatever the reason, not intentional. So we'll say, what must he do? قَرَأَ فِي الْأَخِيرَيْنِ. He will read in next 2 rakats Al-Fatiha, Surah Fatiha, was Surah and Surah wa Jahara, and he will also read it loud. So in other words, in the Isha namaz now, you will read, normally the second 2 rakats are soft. I mean, the second 2 rakats, the third rakat, the fourth rakat is soft. But here he will read it loud. So he'll recite Surah Fatiha loud, and he'll recite the Surah loud, right? Carry on. وَهَذَا عِنْدَ أَبِي حَنِيفَةَ وَمُحَمَّدٍ رَحِمَهُ اللَّهُ. So this is the opinion of Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, which we term as tarafain, right? So just repeat it again. What we were saying, according to Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad, if you recited the 2 surahs in the first rakat, you never recite Surah Fatiha, it's not necessary to recite Surah Fatiha in the second 2 rakats. But Imam Hanifa and Imam Muhammad says, if you recited Surah Fatiha, but you never recite the surah, then you, in the last 2 rakats of Isha namaz, contrary to habit, you will recite Surah Fatiha and recite the surahs loud, right? Right. So this is according to Tarafain, right? Carry on. لأن الجواب إذا فات
لأن الواجب
لأن الواجب إذا فات عن وقته لا يقضى إلا بدليل.
Right, interesting. So Imam Abu Yusuf says in both scenarios, the scenario where he only recited the surahs in the beginning, or the scenario where he recited only the surah Fatiha, he says just leave it as it is, carry on. Why? Because his reasoning is similar. I told you this before that like if you forgot the qunut of witr and you went into ruku, don't call the imam back up. Leave him, let him carry on because he left out the wajib. And if you leave out the wajib, why leave out the wajib to come back to do why disturb a farz to come back to do a wajib, because the wajib is lesser. And I gave you another scenario of this one also. If you, for example, forgot to sit in tashahud, the first tashahud, al-ka'datul ula, and you stood up and you were closer to standing, we say carry on with your third rakat, and just make sajda sahu afterwards. So similar, Imam Yusuf is saying something similar there. Imam Yusuf is saying something similar. That look here, you left out the wajib unintentionally. You don't make qadha with nothing. Yes, if you got a proof from the hadith that where a wajib was left out and qadha was made for it, then we'll do that. But here what we do is we just continue and make sajda sahu. You understood that? وقال أبو يوسف رحمه الله لا يقضي واحدة منهما. You will not make qadha of any one of them too. لأن الواجب, because a wajib إذا فات عن وقته, when it is missed from his place, لا يقضى إلا بدليل. You do not make qadha except with a proof, with a dalil, right? So in both scenarios, and remember Imam Tarafain said the first scenario you don't have to recite the Surah Fatiha, right? I mean, if you left. Second scenario, you left out the Surah, you recite Surah. Then in the third and fourth rakat, you recite the Surah and the Fatiha, right? So this is the reasoning. Read the reason.
والفرق بين الوجهين أن قراءة الفاتحة شرعت على وجه يترتب عليه السورة.
Yeah. So now he's giving the reasoning why in the first scenario you don't recite. It's not necessary to recite Surah Fatiha again. But in the second scenario, you will recite Surah Fatiha and the Surah. He's saying, see, walahuma, they say, وَهُوَ الْفَرْقُ, and this is the reason between the two scenarios, وَالْفَرْقُ بِالْوَجْهَيْنِ أَنَّ قِرَاءَةَ الْفَاتِحَةِ, the recitation of Surah Fatiha شُرِعَتْ عَلَى وَجْهٍ يَتَرَتَّبُ عَلَيْهَا السُّورَةُ. The whole idea of Surah Fatiha is that أن قراءة الفاتحة, Surah Fatiha, it has been established على وجه, in such a manner that يترتب عليها السورة, that a surah must come after it, right? Let's carry on. Yeah. So فلو قضاها. So if we say that the other surah, the surah where we say that you left out Surah Fatiha, and then you only recited the surahs, then we so according to Tarafain, you don't have to recite Surah Fatiha again in the next two rakats, right? It doesn't become farz. So he's saying, فَلَوْ قَضَاهَا فِي الْأُخْرَيَيْنِ. If we say you must necessarily make qadha in the last two rakats, يَتَرَتَّبُ الْفَاتِحَةُ عَلَى السُّورَةِ تَتَرَتَّبُ. That means Surah Fatiha will be placed in such a تترتب الفاتحة, that the surah, the Fatiha will become dependent upon the surah. وهذا خلاف الموضوع, and this is contrary to how it is. Remember what will happen? First the Fatiha is supposed to come, and then the surah is supposed to come. So now what you're doing, you're putting the surah first, and then you're putting the Fatiha, because you're saying the Fatiha is necessary in the next rakat. You understood what I'm saying? You understood that? So the whole idea is first comes Fatiha, then comes the surah. So if you're going to say it is necessary or it is wajib to do the Fatiha in the next two rakats, that means what are you doing? You're putting the Fatiha after the surah, which is not correct, right? Yeah, so see, so بِخِلَافِ مَا إِذَا تَرَكَ السُّورَةَ, but contrary to where if you read the Surah Fatiha in the first two rakats, but you never recite the Surah, so there you're still maintaining the order which is first Surah Fatiha, and then what? And in the Surah. So, right, بخلاف ما إذا ترك السورة, right? لأنه أمكن قضاؤها على وجه المشروع. So you're doing it like how it's supposed to do. First comes Surah Fatiha, and then comes the Surah after that. Is that you got that one guys clear? How the online people got it? Let's carry on, right? Okay, so what are they doing here? They're explaining the ibarat of Jami Saghir. You see that ibarat there, which says there, I need you to go back there, which says you must read a surah. See there, the second scenario. Where is the second scenario? وَإِنْ قَرَأَ الْفَاتِحَةَ وَلَمْ يَزِدْ عَلَيْهَا. See there, وَإِنْ قَرَأَ الْفَاتِحَةَ وَلَمْ يَزِدْ عَلَيْهَا قَرَأَ فِي الْأُخْرَيَيْنِ الْفَاتِحَةَ وَالسُّورَةَ وَجَهَرَ. That's what he's speaking about. See there. If you did not, right, recite Surah Fatiha, right? Sorry, you recite, in Qara al-Fatiha, you recite Surah Fatiha, right? وَلَمْ يَزِدْ عَلَيْهَا. But he never recited the surahs in the first two rakats, right? قَرَأَ فِي الْأُخْرَيْنِ الْفَاتِحَةَ وَالسُّورَةَ عَلَيْهَا. He will recite in the next two rakats Surah Fatiha, and he will recite the surah, and he will recite it loud. Are you with me? This is the ibarat of Jami Saghir. What is it? So now in this ibarat that we are doing here, ثم ذكر هاونا or ثم ذكر هاونا. What you got, ذكر or ذكر? ثم, he's discussing that ibarat. So he's saying that, look, this ibarat of Jami Saghir, it's suggesting that you have to read. If you never recite the surahs in the first two rakats, then you have to recite Surah Fatiha, and you have to recite the surahs in the next two rakats. Are you with me? That's what the ibarat suggests. That's what he's saying. ثُمَّ ذَكَرَ هَاهُنَا. So what هَاهُنَا referred to this text which I told you. قَرَأَ فِي الْأَخِيرَيْنِ الْفَاتِحَةَ وَالسُّورَةَ. If anybody's not clear, not with us, then they can just let us know. Right? We're referring. So this is Sahib Hidayah's Tabsira. It is his analysis of the ibarat of Jami Saghir. Because I told you, remember, we said that Hidayah Sharif originally is made up of the ibarat of Quduri Sharif and Jami Saghir. Then he got his explanation. So he's saying, what he's saying before we look in the kitab, he's saying that this text of Jami Saghir is suggesting that if you only recited the surah in the first two rakats, if you only recited Surah Fatiha in the first two rakats, and you never recite the surah, then it is necessary that you have to recite Surah Fatiha in the surah in the next two rakats. So he said, that's what he's saying. ثُمَّ ذَكَرَهَا هُنَا. So in other words, ذَكَرَ يعني what is mentioned here in the ibarat of Jami Saghir, مَا يَدُلُّ عَلَى الْوُجُوبِ. What points would wujub? That if you never recite the two surahs in the first two rakats, then it is necessary, it is farz to recite what? The surah and the Surah Fatiha and surah after it. But so this is Jami Saghir ibarat. But if you look at Mabsut, also Imam Muhammad's call, there وفي الأصل بلفظ الاستحباب. In Mabsut, there it suggests that in the second scenario that it is only mustahab to recite Surah Fatiha again and the surah again. It is not wajib to recite Surah Fatiha and to recite the surah again. You understood that? Is it clear? So just to repeat again, that is in the original Hidayah, he mentioned the text of Jami Saghir, and Jami Saghir ibarat suggests that if you only recited Surah Fatiha in the first two rakats and you never recite the surah, then it is necessary to recite the Surah Fatiha and to recite the surah. That is gleaned, or it is understood from the text of Jami Saghir. But if you look at the Asal Mabsut, with the exact same scenario is discussed, then in Asal Mabsut, they're saying that it is not faraz, but it is mustahab then to recite the Surah Fatiha and the surah. In other words, if you just carry on as normal, you either recite the Surah Fatiha, or if you stand for the duration of 3 tasbeehs, or if you just recite the 3 tasbeehs, then you carry on, then you make sajda sahu for having left out a wajib. You understood that? So وفي الأصل بلفظ الاستباحة لأنها so why, what is the reason why they saying there it is mustahab? What you are saying, the online question, this is correct. This refer to the Farz Salah. Obviously refers to the Farz Salah because in the Farz Salah you own surah is wajib only in the first two rakats. In the Nafil Salah, all Nafil Salah, surah is wajib in all four rakats, isn't it? So this replies to the Farz Salah only. Because remember, in Farz Salah, you have to only recite Surah Fatiha and Surah in the first two rakats, and in the second two rakats, it's not wajib to recite Surah Fatiha, but it is Sunnah. But in Nafil Salah, you have to recite the Surah and Surah Fatiha in all four rakats. So this scenario, to answer your question, then it applies only to the Farz Salah. So again, the scenario is you only recited Surah Fatiha and you never recited Surah. So according to the text of Jami' al-Saghir, it is wajib to recite Surah and Surah Fatiha in the next two rakats of the Farz namaz. Under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be wajib to recite anything. According to the text of Mabsut, it is mustahab. It is mustahab, right? Now they're giving the reason why it is mustahab. Yes, it is only referring to Farz Salah because, as I said, in Farz Salah, it's not necessary to recite in the second two rakats. That's why you got a choice of recite according to Jami' Sahih. If you left it out, you have to. And according to Asal Mabsut, it's mustahab too. So now in the next text, we'll explain the reasoning of Mabsut, why it is only mustahab. He's saying, لأنها إن كانت مؤخرة, right? فغير موصولة بالفاتحة فلم يكن مراعاة موضوعها من كل وجه. So see, if you're going to read the surahs in the next two rakats, right? You never read it in the first two rakats. لأن إن كانت مؤخرة فغير موصولة, then it is not joined with where it's supposed to be originally. It's supposed to be in the first two rakats, right? فَغَيْرُ مَوْصُولَةٍ بِالْفَاتِحَةِ, it's not joined with the Fatiha where it's supposed to be. فَلَمْ يَكُنْ مُرَاءَةُ مَوْضُوعِهَا مِنْ, so you're not doing like how you're supposed to do it. So you're not doing properly like how you're supposed to do it. So rather just carry on and make a sajda. Then in the next verse, وَيَجْهَرُ بِهِمَا وَالصَّحِيحُ. So if this is like this happened to an imam reading in a Farz Salah, whatever, وَيَجْهَرُ بِهِمَا وَالصَّحِيحُ. So then in the second, the third rakat, and the fourth rakat, you will read loud. You read Surah Fatiha loud and read Surah loud. Why? لأن الجمع بين الجهر والمخافة في ركعة واحد شنيع. Because you won't say now, okay, look here, normally in the third rakat and the fourth rakat, you recite Surah Fatiha silently. So recite the Surah Fatiha silently, and then you recite the Qiraat loud. Recite the Surah loud. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. Since you are going to be reciting the Surah loud, recite the Surah Fatiha loud as well. So now this is a scenario where this is a nice trivia question. You can ask the person, tell me a scenario in where you will be making loud Qiraat in all four rakats. Right, so if the guy knows his fiqh properly, say yes, there is a scenario. The scenario is this, where you recited Surah Fatiha in the first two rakats and nobody corrected a person. He forgot to recite the Surah, and then he made the third rakat and the fourth rakat. So in the third rakat and the fourth rakat, he will recite the Surah and he will recite the Surah Fatiha and he will recite the Surah loud, right? لأن الجمع بين الجهر والمخافة في ركعة واحدة شنيعة, because together between half of the rakat must be loud and half of the rakat must be soft. Shani'atun, it doesn't make sense. It is silliness, right? So, وتغيير النفل وهو الفاتحة أولى. And it is وتغيير, you are changing the nafl, right? وهو الفاتحة الأولى, and that is the first Fatiha. In other words, normally the nafil is supposed to be recited silently, right? But now here we're saying, according to this call, it is necessary to recite the Fatiha. So something which is nafil now, you are reciting it softly. So it's wawa right? وتغيير النفل, you're changing the nafl, وهو الفاتحة الأولى, and that is the first Fatiha. Okay, we stop there. Time is up. We'll continue tomorrow, inshallah. Subhanallah.